To get started early this morning because our speaker has a tight schedule. All right, well, good morning. As you may have guessed, I am not Morton Blackwell, but I'm here to welcome you to this month's Wednesday Wake Up Club Breakfast. In 2011 already, the Leadership Institute has trained 7,136 students, bringing the total number trained since 1979 to more than 97,896. In your program in front of you, you have the school schedule for 2011. Please take a moment and review our upcoming schools and consider either attending one or recommending a school to a friend who may be interested. It's now my pleasure to introduce Carol Way, who will deliver the invocation and the Pledge of Allegiance. Carol is the Leadership Institute's new media training coordinator. She's a graduate of Hillsdale College with a degree in political economy.
Good morning. Will you please bow your heads and join me in prayer? Father God, thank you for blessing this country, for placing in the United States men and women who will fight for the liberty and safety of future generations. Give us understanding and perseverance as we pray for our leaders. Father, give them wisdom. Raise up great leaders from the youth of our nation, and help us to guide them well as we train them. Lord, we praise you for all of this. Bless this breakfast. Please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Carol. It is now my pleasure to introduce Jen Stovall, who will introduce our speaker, Grover Norquist. Jen is a regional field coordinator for the Leadership Institute, which means she's responsible for identifying, recruiting, training, and supporting conservative leaders, activists, and groups on college campuses. Previously, she worked for the Leadership Institute as a field representative. Jen.
Good morning. Mr. Norquist is the president of Americans for Tax Reform, a taxpayer advocacy group that he founded in 1985 at President Reagan's request. ATR is a coalition of taxpayer groups, individuals, and businesses opposed to higher taxes at the federal, state, and local levels. ATR organizes Taxpayer Protection Pledge, which asks all candidates for federal and state offices to commit themselves in writing to oppose all tax increases. Mr. Norquist chairs the D.C.-based Wednesday morning meetings, weekly gathering of more than 150 elected officials, political activists, and movement leaders. Mr. Norquist also serves on the board of directors for the National Rifle Association of America, the ACO, and the Nixon Center. He's also authored 2 books, Rock the House and Leave Us Alone, getting the government's hands out of our money, our guns, and our lives. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Norquist.
Thank you very much. We just got passed through the House and the Senate. Is this working all right? Yeah. We just got passed through the House and the Senate legislation that will claw back $2.5 trillion that Obama had planned to spend. His debt increase for the next decade was scheduled to be $10 trillion. We took $2.5 trillion back off the table, and we did not raise taxes. This is progress, and the reason why there's some concern about it is if you think this is the end game, if you think this is everything that's going to happen, Obama plussed it up 10, we take it down 2.5, we're behind 7.5 trillion. That's not terribly helpful. But if you recognize that this is not the end game, this fight we just had was not Armageddon. This was not the final conflict to determine the direction of the country. This was Bull Run. Okay? We are starting a long process to decide which way we're going, and I don't know how you work this analogy, but anyway, we won. Those of us that want a limited government and less spending, and we moved in the right direction, $2.5 trillion. And it's important as activists that we always remember the distinction between compromising and losing. And we get annoyed because for too often, for too long, we've been told by people, oh, we're compromising, when in the past politicians would move in the wrong direction. Compromise is when you want to go to California from here and you get as far as West Virginia, okay? It's not California, but you're moving in the right direction slowly. As a matter of fact, you have to go through West Virginia to get to California. So getting to West Virginia is not treason, it's on the way. However, if you intend to go to California from D.C. and your feet get wet and the people around you start speaking a lot of French, you are not compromising, you are losing. You're moving in the wrong direction. And so when you take a look at this compromise, this deal, this stalemate, we're moving in the right direction. And the reason this is a bigger deal now than it was 20, 30, 40 years ago is in the past, say during Richard Nixon's presidency, the Republicans wanted to increase government somewhat, and the Democrats wanted to increase government spending a whole bunch, okay? And so there'd be this compromise between somewhat more government and a whole bunch more government. And we get more government. And that was a compromise because they were both heading in the same direction. They were just debating how far to go and how fast to go. And you could, in fact, come to a compromise, and everybody would be happy. The Republicans would go, well, the Democrats wanted to go way far, and we only wanted to go so far. And we helped because we slowed down their march towards statism. And the Democrats would take our, what we had conceded, put it in their pocket, and say, we'll see you in a year when we ask for more. Okay? And we kept playing this game. That's how we got the size government that we presently have. However, we now have a different modern Republican Party and that wants less spending and lower taxes. Democrats want higher taxes and more spending. One of us wants to go east, one wants to go west. What's the compromise? Right? I mean, if you want to go in two opposite directions, there's no compromise. Somebody, if it moves, like a tug of war, somebody's winning and somebody's losing. If it doesn't move, you're at a stalemate. You're not at a compromise, you're at a stalemate. Anyway, we won the last week, or the last 6 months. We took, from where we were heading, we took $2.5 trillion off the table. As Congressman Lindsey Graham said, we used to be running in the wrong direction, now we're walking in the wrong direction. But that's progress, because before you turn around and run back the other way, you need to slow down, stop, and turn around. And the other team has the presidency and the Senate, and so we don't get to run the whole show. Now, how did we get here? Americans for Tax Reform, the group that I head, was created back in 1985 to pass the Tax Reform Act of '86. In doing that, we created the No Tax Increase Pledge. We ask all elected officials to sign a pledge not to raise taxes, no net tax increase. We do that at the national level, presidents, congressmen, senators, but also at the state level as well. We have over 1,200 state legislators who've taken the pledge, 13 governors, and one of the things that people tend not to focus on in Washington, D.C., because they're only vaguely aware of the world outside of Washington, D.C., is that in state after state that had been increasing spending and had been increasing taxes, we have a change of governor in Florida and Texas. Florida and Texas state are. In Georgia, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, Ohio, Maine, all states that had been moving to higher taxes and more spending, elected a Republican governor who took the pledge. We're not raising taxes. New Jersey, Michigan, we're not raising taxes. We're only cutting spending. And so we dropped $2 to $3 billion a year in spending in Ohio, in Pennsylvania, in Wisconsin, in Michigan, and we did not raise taxes in any of those states where the Republican governor took the pledge. They've kept the pledge, and we've stopped tax increases there. States that are increasing taxes are Illinois, Maryland, Connecticut, states with Democrat control. So the pledge at the federal and the state level says we're not going to raise taxes. And during the last 24 years, we have branded the modern Republican Party as the party that will not raise your taxes. It may do many other foolish things, but it will not raise your taxes. And so we now have all but 6 members of the U.S. House today, all but 6 Republican members of the U.S. House have signed the pledge not to raise taxes and kept it. All but 7 members of the Republicans in the U.S. Senate have signed the pledge and kept it. And when the Hill magazine went and talked to the 6 Republicans in the House and the 7 in the Senate who hadn't signed the pledge and said, you know, why didn't you? Only one of them said that he was actually in favor of raising taxes. All the others said, I'll never raise taxes, but they gave you some reason why I don't sign pledges, or some of them thought it would interfere with going to a retail sales tax, the fair tax, which it doesn't. The only guy who's actually enthusiastically in favor of taxes is Frank Wolf, okay? So when he talks to you about your vote or your money, he is the only Republican in the House of Representatives who thinks raising taxes would be a good idea, and wrote an entire op-ed in the Washington Post criticizing me for being a bully because I was opposed to tax increases. Now, you see, the bully is the guy who steals your lunch money, not the guy who says, no stealing lunch money. So, Frank Wolf, keep your GD hands out of our pockets and off our lunch money. And work focused on the other really good stuff you've been doing, and knock it off with the hands and pockets. But that's not bad, okay? One guy in the entire Republican caucus in the House and everybody in the Senate says that they wouldn't do it. But because of the number of people who've taken the pledge, and the press has been talking in the last several weeks about the power of the pledge, they completely miss the chicken and the egg part here. What the pledge does is it makes it possible for an elected official to credibly promise to you as a voter that he or she won't raise your taxes, okay? For several thousand years, politicians have been promising not to raise taxes. Emperors, kings, elected officials, I won't raise taxes. I would hate to raise taxes. The last thing I want to do is raise taxes. And yet then they do raise taxes. And how do you know if a politician says he's not going to raise taxes, whether it's a fib or whether he means it, okay? And what the pledge does, it's a written document, and it's the same wording in all 50 states over the last 24 years. And it says, I will not raise your taxes, no net tax increase, okay? It's got 2 witnesses, it's dated, and we make many copies and share them with everybody in the district, and we keep the original in a big safe somewhere that the Washington Post keeps asking where it is, which makes me wonder why they want to know where it is. I'd have told them, except they kept drilling. Where exactly? What's the combination? So when somebody takes the pledge, it's easier for voters to say, I think he or she means it, because they put it in writing. They can't take it back. They can't argue, oh, that wasn't in context. You see, you should have read the next paragraph. There is no context. The pledge stands alone. And then, of course, it helped that George Herbert Walker Bush, Bush 41, won his Republican primary in 1988 against Dole in New Hampshire because he took the pledge and Dole didn't. They handed Dole the pledge in the final debate before the New Hampshire primary, and Dole recoiled like a vampire, and somebody just tossed a cross into his lap. It was great television, but it wasn't very good politics for Dole. Dole lost. And then Bush said, read my lips, and he won the presidency against Mike Dukakis. Then 2 years later, the 2 smartest people in the world talked Bush into actually raising taxes in 1990, and Bush lost the presidency 2 years later. Now, looking back, he had a fairly successful presidency. He managed the collapse of the Soviet Union without a lot of blood on the floor. He threw Iraq out of Kuwait and didn't get stuck occupying the place for a decade. I mean, he did a whole bunch of things well. Just one hole in the bottom of the boat, tax increase, both saying. So all the other candidates go, ooh, I get it. Take the pledge, win the primary. Take the pledge, win the election. Break the pledge, lose the election. Let me get this straight. Take it and keep it. Got it. And voters know that every candidate watched the same thing unfold. So the voters go, I know that that candidate understands that there's a very high likelihood that he will pay a high price for breaking this pledge. Therefore, I think he means it when he or she takes the pledge. So the pledge what the pledge does, it makes it easy for people to make the commitment credible. Okay? What you don't have is a bunch of people taking the pledge and breaking it. When I first came up with the pledge, I thought, You're going to have a whole bunch of Democrats who signed. The only guy who ever did that, by the way, is Tom Daschle. Tom Daschle was the only one who took the pledge to lie his way through an election, and it worked for him. But that has not been replicated in other cases. So the pledge has taken tax increases off the table. We've not had a Republican vote for an income tax increase in Washington, D.C. since 1990. That's 21 years, okay? There are a couple guys who voted for a cigarette tax increase early in the Obama administration, but other than that, there are no votes by any Republicans for a tax increase in the last 21 years. And there wasn't any tax increase enacted in Washington, D.C., the federal government, from Clinton's tax increase in 93, passed with all Democrat votes, to 16 days into the Obama administration when he raised taxes on cigarettes. Okay? That's a 15-and-a-half-year period without a tax increase passed in Washington, D.C. Longest period in American history, going back to George Washington, where there wasn't a tax increase by the federal government. Fairly successful. We have branded the modern Republican Party as the party that will not raise your taxes. And just like Coca-Cola has a brand and a trademark and quality control, and it makes it easy to go to a store and pick up a Coke. You just look at it, you know it's there, you put it in the basket, you take it home. You don't have to ask your friends what's in it. You don't have to read the ingredients. You don't have to ask the proprietor, could I have a taste to see what this is? You know what it is. Take it home. But if you get home and you're two-thirds of the way through your bottle of Coke, and you look down at what's left in your Coke bottle, and there is a rat head in your Coke bottle, you do not say to yourself, you know, I'm thinking I may not finish the rest of this particular bottle of Coke tonight. You, in fact, wonder whether you ever buy Coke in the future, and you call your friends and tell them about it. You go on the local TV and you show them the cool rat head, and Coke has a big problem because it damages the brand for everyone else. Republican elected officials who vote for a tax increase are rat heads in a Coke bottle. They damage the brand for everyone else. This is not a victimless crime. Oh, there's Johnny over in the corner raising taxes. How sad for Johnny and his family. No, this hurts other people. It confuses small children about the nature of the world. So we have one, branded the modern Republican Party. That is the party that will not raise your taxes. Boom. Okay. That is the necessary, but as we noted during the Bush years, not the sufficient condition for limited government. Step one, don't raise taxes. Step two, don't spend so much money. Okay? We're a little loose on the step two part there. Okay? And as a result, you saw the budget drifted up. And one of the problems we had was in the modern Republican Party, the modern Reagan Republican conservative movement, everybody's at the table because on their vote-moving issue, they want one thing from the government. They want to be left alone. Taxpayers don't raise my taxes. Businessmen and women don't regulate or tax my business. Homeschoolers, let me educate my kids at home, okay? They don't go knocking on your door telling you to homeschool. They just don't want the government to mess with them. I serve on the board of directors of the National Rifle Association, Second Amendment Committee. Leave our Second Amendment rights alone, okay? Don't go bothering other people. All the various communities of faith, people from the most important, these are on people's vote-moving issues, okay? People from the most important thing in their life is practicing their faith, transmitting it to their kids. They want one thing from the government, that's to leave them alone. They're not asking for Baptist stamps. They're not asking for the government to make everybody be an Episcopalian. They simply wish the government to leave them alone in their family life and their religious life. And so around our table, we can all work together to fight the left because nobody's in conflict on a vote-moving issue. Now, you may look across the table at somebody else and say, that's a rather odd way to run your life. And the guy who wants to make money all day looks across the table at the guy who wants to go to church all day and says, that's not what I do with my spare time. And they both look over at the guy who wants to fondle his guns all day, and they say, that's not what we do with our spare time. But it's not necessary that we agree what we do with our liberty. It's necessary only that we agree that we should be free, okay? And that's why we can have in our coalition all the various communities of faith, evangelical Protestants, conservative Catholics, Orthodox Jews, Muslims, Mormons, people who do not agree on who gets to heaven or why. Matter of fact, they're fairly convinced the guy on the other side of the table is going straight to Hades because he completely misunderstands Scripture. But if I'm to be free to get to heaven, the other guy has to be free to go to Hades, and we're all politically on the same team. Not, on all issues or some checklist, but we all vote for the same candidate who promises to leave us all alone. Well, until the Tea Party, we had a problem. Because Bush stood in the middle of the room and he said, I'm not going to steal your guns, I'm not going to mess with your homeschooling, I'm not going to mess with your kids or your faith or your family or your money or your business or your profession, I'm going to spend a little too much. And while you sat there holding your number one vote-moving issue, and said, thank you, Mr. President, for my vote-moving issue, and I wish you wouldn't spend so much. Grumble, grumble. But nobody threw anything heavy, and nobody walked out of the room. And so spend too much kept drifting. What happened was the Tea Party movement showed up, not in reaction. We noticed the Tea Party movement, meaning people who cared about spending, they wandered away from the modern Republican Party in 2006 and 2008, gave us a Democratic House, Senate, and President. But they really showed up when Obama came in and terrified them with the wave, the wall of spending coming in on the stimulus and TARP 2 and the $1 trillion in domestic discretionary spending and cap and tax. I mean, a whole bunch of things we didn't get, cap and tax, and what we did get with health care and the massive tax increases and spending coming from that. Massive jump in spending from 20% of GDP up to 25% of GDP, from $2.8 trillion the year he got elected to this year, 2.9 to 3.8 trillion, just about $1 trillion up, 1 year additional spending, massive, massive problems. And the Tea Party movement arose, and you saw a visible collection of people who cared about total government spending, which we didn't know existed before, or at least couldn't touch them, feel them, see them in a room, watch them in a demonstration, tweet with them. But think of the Tea Party movement as the sixth wave of immigration into the modern Republican Party. 1964, the Goldwater campaign brought new people in. We became a 50-state party as opposed to the party of the North. Then in the early 70s, Phyllis Schlafly and the pro-family movement brought new people in. In the late 70s, you had the religious right coming in, the people concerned about religious liberty, the effort by Carter to go after Christian schools and Christian radio stations. Then you had, in 88, Pat Robertson's failed presidential campaign, which activated 1.9 million people, and they all showed up in the Republican Party, took over 19 Republican Party state parties, and stayed in the party and built it. Now, each time that there were these waves of people coming into the modern Republican Party, our friends in the establishment left would say, oh boy, now the Republicans are finished for sure, okay? Because they've got all these new guys with principles, they're just going to sink this whole project, and the Republican Party's finished now. And I understand that, okay? People who would like to see you bleed to death in the gutter probably don't give you the best strategic advice on how to win. But what was a little disconcerting is a lot of mainstream Republicans said, oh, I don't know about all these new people coming in. This is a big problem. There used to be 10 people at the town committee Republican meeting. Now they're 50, and they're unlikely to reelect me chairman, and this is a big problem. And can you imagine if Walmart took the attitude, uh-oh, look at all those cars coming into the parking lot. And there are all these people coming in the store, and they're buying all our stuff, and we're going to have to get new stuff, and you're going to have to hire more people, and we're going to have to do something with all this money we're making. And, I mean, right? Walmart sees more customers as like a good thing, right? And over time, it's taken Republicans a while to realize that every one of these waves of immigration in the Republican Party left the Republican Party stronger, more people, more votes, more guys elected. Then you had, and you'd think we'd learn this, right? And then Ron Paul in 2008 brings all these new people, particularly young people, into the Republican Party, and there are all these Republican parties out west going, we can't let these guys into the party, they'll take it over. And you got all these new guys coming, and then you had the Tea Party movement. Same thing. People who, oh, they dress funny, they talk loudly in church. I mean, I don't know about this. And yet tremendously strengthened the modern Republican Party, gave us the House and 2 out of 3 Senate races that were up in 2010. So because of the Tea Party movement coming in, we now have somebody sitting around the table with a hammer that says, don't spend so much, okay? Just like the guy with the hammer who said, don't steal my guns, okay? Very, very helpful parameter, teaching, the politicians how to stay within the little lines when they're drawing. Don't step outside the lines. And so the Tea Party movement has made spending a vote-moving issue, or at least made it, maybe it was always a vote-moving issue. We can now see that it's a vote-moving issue. If 10 guys leave the room over the course of an hour, you don't know what happened, but they jump up and walk out of the room at the same time, you go, oh, something just happened here. So we now have a visible, palpable part of the movement that cares about spending, which, by the way, is, of course, the real metric that we should be measuring. I mean, we had an entire freedom movement that wasn't actually measuring the thing we needed to measure, which was total size of government. Now we do with the Tea Party movement, and that's been a tremendous, tremendous step forward. That's why the fight we just had was so helpful. Two things came of it. One, that I think have, as much as anything in life, have permanently changed the direction of politics in a good way for us. Okay? You can argue, oh, I didn't want $2.5 trillion, I wanted $4.5 trillion. Well, so did I, right? But we got $2.5 trillion. But look at the direction that changed. One, in 1982 and 1990, when everybody came together, they raised taxes and promised to cut spending. The spending cuts never happened. The tax increases were real, permanent. We're still paying them. So when we came to have this confab again, the Democrats were convinced that Republicans would bring to the table tax increases because that's sort of your ante. You want to be in the room, we're going to talk about the deficit, bring tax increases. We will promise you spending cuts after you bring us tax increases. In point of fact, if you bring tax increases, you never get to spending cuts, period, because they will take your tax increases and spend them, then we don't need to cut spending. We just raise taxes. But this time the Republican caucus held both on taxes and on spending. So on taxes, we had enough pledge takers say, we're not raising taxes, not happening, okay? And many of us either lived through or read about 82 and 90. This is not happening again. No more Lucy and the football, okay? We've done that. We're not doing it again. Won't happen. And the Democrats were just convinced that it would happen. They kept coming back asking, well, what about getting rid of deductions and credits, spending through the tax code? Jon Stewart had a wonderful, funny routine about this spending through the tax code. You mean like taxes? Yes, exactly like taxes. And we kept saying no. But again, it was 7 months. They kept asking, what about this tax? What about this tax? What about this tax? What about taxes early, late? What about taxes just on rich people? What about, the Democrats, when they keep asking for taxes, are like a teenage boy on a prom date. He's looking for one thing, and he keeps asking in different ways, okay? And it doesn't do any good at all to go no, no, yes, okay? That doesn't help. You've got to go no, no, no the whole time. And anyway, Boehner and Mitch McConnell kept saying no, 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 no all the way through, and the other team kept hoping that they'd miss a beat, but they didn't. So no tax increase. Two, we actually got some real spending restraint here. It's $2.5 trillion. It's not bad. It's okay. Step in the right direction. We need more. The Ryan plan, $6 trillion in spending restraint, but we couldn't pass that through the Senate. We couldn't get the president to sign it. That awaits a different Senate and a different occupant in the White House. Spending restraint. Boehner came up with the Boehner rule. And that is, if you want $2.5 trillion in more debt ceiling, higher debt ceiling, you will have to cut total government spending over the next decade, not tomorrow, but over the next 10 years, $2.5 trillion. And he held to that number, and he never moved off that number. And so if you pay attention, the two things Boehner said he wanted, Boehner got. No tax increase, dollar for dollar, spending cut for debt ceiling increase. Why is this important? Because we will never, every little bit, particularly until we get this turned around, we're going to be hitting this debt ceiling. And every time we hit the debt ceiling and they want some breathing space, there's going to be a cost. You want $1 trillion. Because remember, Obama's planning on increasing deficit spending debt, $7.5 trillion still over the next decade. So we're going to hit this debt ceiling. And every time we do, we're going to bend down the cost curve of government spending because he's going to have to pay with reduced spending in the future for the breathing space this year. And this, we've not had this tool before. This is a whole new tool, weapon in our quiver, arrow in our quiver, tool in our toolbox. New, pick your analogy. It's cool. It's good. We have a new mechanism for reining in spending that we didn't have before. And remember this time, the government's going to collapse and the world will end, and because if we hit this date. Well, we got our work done. We didn't hit the date. The world didn't end. Stock market went down because of the new consumer spending numbers that sucked because Obama's damaged the economy so much, but not because we were close to the deadline. The next time we hit this deadline, we're going to be going, the whole world knows that how these work. No tax increase and dollar-for-dollar spending cuts. So get back to the table and do your job. It's going to be a lot easier to win the next fight and the fight after that and the fight after that because we set the rules this time in a very helpful way. So that's why I'm cheerful about the direction. Again, I thought if this was the last budget cut, I'd be disappointed. But it's the first budget cut. It's the beginning of a long struggle. It's not Armageddon. It's Bull Run. That said, let me take questions and thoughts. And yes. The fight isn't over. The fight is engaged. We are now talking about how to cut spending. And so weigh in. Talk to your congressmen and senators. Make it clear where you want budgets cut. Focus at the local level. I think the success we're having at the state level is very, very helpful in educating elected officials in Washington that you can be a popular governor while taking on some of the unions and the special interests. If you want, somebody says, well, where would you cut? What services would you cut? In the United States today, average private sector worker earns $60,000 if you count pay, benefits, and pension. Okay, $60,000 a year, average American, private sector. State local worker average $80,000, $20,000 more a year. Average federal worker $120,000, twice what the private sector guys make. Now, a lot of that's in pension and benefits. So the government worker goes, I don't see all this additional money. We will be paying for it years out, which is why some of the states are having such trouble, because the day has now come when states are putting a great deal of resources into pensions and benefits. So the liberals have this idea that government is like Robin Hood, stealing from the rich and giving to the poor. But I don't know if you saw the Monty Python routine where Robin Hood comes in and robs the rich guys in the castle and takes the money out to these poor people in a hovel, and he keeps doing that 3 or 4 times, by which the guys in the hovel have all the jewels and the crowns and all the money, and the guys in the castle are like naked and don't have anything, and then he has to reverse the whole thing. Okay. Maybe the day was when the government, state and local government, was transferring from the rich to the poor, but we are now 70-80% of state and local budgets is pay, pension, and benefits to government workers. State and local government is a massive transfer from lower income people to higher income people. And we overpay by at least, if you simply pay the 19.5 public sector workers, state and local, and the several million federal guys, the same amount people that did comparable work in the public sector do, you'd save about $400 billion a year. So we're paying $400 billion a year, not to government workers, more than they would get in the private sector. So if you went to pay equity, you'd save $4 trillion a decade. That doesn't reduce any of the stupid and destructive things the government's doing with your money. It just makes it less expensive for them to mess with you and tell you that you have to have light bulbs that convince you you have cataracts and those toilets that don't quite flush completely. So anyway, I would argue that we can take a look at some of those things as a way to save resources. Yeah. Use the mic.
What if we said after a 6-month period, every able-bodied American who was drawing a welfare check and collecting food stamps had to find a job?
That would be one approach. The other one, the one that actually our friend Paul Ryan's put together, he said, let's take all the welfare programs, all the means-tested programs, Medicaid, food stamps, there are like 75, 77 of them, and block grant them to the states and let 50 states determine how best to deal with this. And most of the governors have said, we would like to do that because if you remove all the strings and the rules, and there are X number of of different programs that are that claim to do the same thing, the states could actually make money off the deal, and you would just let the total that the feds pay grow with inflation rather than what it had been growing at. That alone saves you $750 billion in one decade. $750 billion in a decade to block grant it and allow it, not cut it, allow it to increase with inflation. But it's less than they had been spending. So I think you could do a lot better than that. Tell you what, if people who have questions could raise them, I will take them all at once because I unfortunately have to run back into the city to meet with all of our state and local guys. So we'll take the questions together and I will answer them all at once. Yes.
That is not true. It's less than 2%. And my second question is about your criticism of your sport of Muslim American. I'm a proud Muslim American. I used to work on the Hill, and I was one of those who started offering prayer, Friday prayer on the Hill. But now when I go to those people, I'm little secular. I don't take everything in literal sense. And these Muslims do not consider me a part of them. They even don't want to say me hi when I go to their Muslim prayer on Capitol Hill sometime nowadays. I wonder that how do you, support these people? Some of them are like extension of Muslim Brotherhood in this country. Don't you find some secular Muslim who have more concern about America than those kind of fundamentalist Islamic parties?
Okay.
Thanks.
Next. The guy in the middle. Somebody over here? Yeah, just loudly. And then I want to get the questions in, but then I'm going to have to run them through quickly.
Concern about the fact that the president is still saying there will be tax increases, that's how they sold it to a lot of their people to vote for it, and how you see the dynamic of resisting that.
Okay. Yep.
1,000 thank yous for what you've done for having Republicans not raise taxes. The problem today we have and going forward is a deficit spending. The Republicans have become the party of borrow and spend. What can you do, or do you have any magical ideas like you had with the tax pledge to stop Republicans and everybody else from borrowing more money, deficit spending?
Okay.
Just to follow up on that question, isn't it time for a cut spending pledge, or specifically a save entitlements by cutting entitlements pledge instead of a no tax hike pledge?
Instead of heresy. Go ahead. I think you may have meant in addition to. Yes.
Thank you again. My question is, Democrats these days are talking about revenue, and obviously we support tax cuts. Will tax cuts actually hurt revenue, which they seem to imply?
Okay. Yep. Not Tom Coburn.
Yes, thank you for your clarity and what you're saying to us today. I'm a major cynic when it comes to use of words in Washington, and I'm very interested in your thoughts about the committee that is supposed to then follow up on yesterday's vote and what they might do with language, what they might take off the table and therefore off the budget, and really put us back where we already are, but keep us in the dark about it.
Absolutely. Any other questions?
Yes, in the plan that was just crafted, what is the mechanism by which we will be assured that the spending cuts will actually happen? How will that be enforced? Where will the strength come from, and how soon will we see them? Are they all planned for year 10? Second part of the question is spending compared to what? Are we comparing it to the same period last year? Are we comparing it to percentage of GDP? Just what is the metric for that? Because it seems like there's a shell game going on relative to considering spending when they talk about base budgeting. Thank you.
Is there one other question? Hand over here.
In terms of job creation, I'm not a genius, but has anybody ever thought of giving direct subsidies to businesses? For instance, you could create thousands of jobs within a month if you told a business, for every new employee you hire, we will give you a subsidy of 20%. And if you would add up all the jobs that we created in the next month, it would be substantially less than all the billions that have been forked over to create some mythical jobs 2 and 3 and 5 years down the line. Thank you.
Yep. Okay, great. Thanks. Some of them come together. One, a lot of questions on the committee. They've set up a committee, 6 Republicans, 6 Democrats, House and Senate, to come up with the budget cuts. Might there be tax increases? Anything that committee recommends goes to the House and Senate to pass. The leadership in the House has said repeatedly, not only will we not allow anything to pass, we will whip against any tax increase. We will whip against it. You can send us a tax increase if you want. We won't vote for it. I've been assured by the House and Senate they will not, the Republicans, they will not send anyone onto that committee who's going to vote for a tax increase. I worry about many things in life. I do not worry that the modern House of Representatives is going to, in an election year, pass a tax increase, okay? Worry about spiders the size of houses, worry about any number of things, but do not worry about that one. The pledge, a spending pledge. How would you write a spending pledge? I mean, we've thought about this over the years when we realized spending was a problem in addition to protecting against tax increases. I promise not to spend too much. I promise not to spend more than some number. Well, it changes every year. So there's not an easy way to figure out how to do a spending pledge. That's why I think some of these lines in the sand, the mechanisms, you want a debt ceiling increase, which is what happens when spending hits a certain level, you're going to have to pay for it with spending cuts. Getting rid of earmarks was a huge step forward. I mean, one of the things that Boehner did was he got the Republicans to vote for a deal that some of them didn't like because it wasn't good enough. Now, that's a nice problem to have. People didn't get dragged into voting for it. Oh, you're cutting too much. I don't want to do this. It was, you're not cutting enough. I don't want to do this. And he got enough to vote with it to pass without giving anyone earmarks. Okay? Earmarks are bribing elected officials to vote against their principles in order to do something, and they use government money to bribe them to vote against their principles. I'm actually technically for earmarks only for Democrats, because then we could give them stupid little projects for their districts in return for free trade and tax cuts and all sorts of other stuff. But when you give a Republican, and when you give a Republican earmarks for that stuff, it endangers their souls, and Democrats don't have souls. So I'm teasing, the little black shriveled up things. But they're there, they just sort of, anyway. I don't worry about corrupting Democrats with earmarks. I do worry about corrupting Republicans with earmarks. But since evidently they won't take my, I thought, brilliant insight on this, so we just go with no earmarks, period. Okay, it's just easier. Job creation, there are lots of ways to do job creation. Theoretically, giving people a subsidy to do jobs would be less stupid than what they're doing, but I really don't think that you want to get any government interference in that question at all. I am very confident we will not raise taxes. That's the one thing that's not going to happen out of this. Question on foreign aid, it's a small number, but foreign aid is what we give other countries so they don't have to have an economic development. At least in the old days, like when Henry VIII wanted a new castle, we must have rich peasants so I can steal their stuff and build a new castle. But the guy in Tanzania, he doesn't need rich peasants because he calls Sweden and they send him a check, or we send him a check. So you can have a country starving around you or doing all sorts of goofy stuff or just stealing the money, and you're writing checks. So I think that almost all foreign aid at almost all times is destructive of the people we say we're helping. It's not, it's costing us money, it's bad. It hurts the guys you're helping. It's like welfare. It doesn't help people. And you could say, well, we'll just do it temporarily. Yeah, really? Like when? Okay, like the temporary. My dad told me years ago it was okay to have temporary rent control in New York after World War II because all these people came back and the prices were expanding, and the temporary rent control in New York is still there, and World War II is over, mostly. So it is very important. You asked about, look, Muslim marriage. We need to work with all communities of faith and make it clear that we're the party of religious liberty, okay? And we're for everybody's religious liberty, and that we're against anybody who's a bad guy, period, but we're against all religious liberty. And the tragedy, the murder in Norway is sickening, okay? that we cannot, we're just the guys who are for religious liberty, and we want to work with everybody with a good heart and soul who wants to work with the modern Republican Party to fight for religious liberty and low taxes and spending, and we've got to make sure that bigots have no home in our party. There's no future for that. Thank you, guys.
I want to thank Mr. Norquist again for his remarks, and as a token of Leadership Institute's appreciation, no, so Adam Smith cufflinks, thank you. For anyone else who's interested in fetching Adam Smith attire, Andrew Patterson, could you raise your hand right there? Andrew Patterson is the man to talk to this morning. Well, I wanted to say thank you again for being here for breakfast this morning. For those who are interested in a tour of the building at the end of the program, Seth Nichols, David Talbot, right in front of me and walking to the front of the room will be offering tours of the building, so just meet him up front at the podium. I hope you'll join us next month for the September Wednesday Wake Up Club breakfast. Our speaker will be Dr. Edwin Fulner, who's the president of the Heritage Foundation. Thank you all very much for being here this morning. Have a good day.